I'm Kerry Shale.
And I'm Daniel Crespin.
And this is Bob Dylan.
Approximately.
I'm just like Anne Frank, like Indiana Jones, and them British bad boys, the Rolling Stones. I go right to the edge. I go right to the end. I go right where all things lost are made good again. I sing the songs of experience like William Blake. I have no apologies to make. Everything's flowing all at the same time. I live on a boulevard of crime. I drive fast cars, and I eat fast foods. I contain multitudes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan Klepper.
No. Thank you, Robert Zimmerman.
Yes. That happens to be like my favorite bit of the entire thing.
I think too.
The crazy man put Indiana Jones next to Anne Frank. That's... that to me, the first time I heard that, I laughed out loud. And for me, in many ways, it contextualizes what is great about being a Bob Dylan fan. Is like you are given the choice to take this as serious, to dive into the meanings behind it all, or to see how ludicrous a choice that is. On paper, if I knew nothing about Dylan, I think I would be outraged by making an Indiana Jones reference in a song next to an Anne Frank reference in a song that could be considered poor taste or ridiculous, or for somebody like Bob Dylan, not at all connected to the classics and the greats, making such a specific pop culture reference. But also, the work of being a Bob Dylan fan is you pore over the lyrics, you trust this person, you give such intention to his choices, and so when that album came out and that lyric presented itself to me, it was such a gift for fans to choose to look into it, to choose to enjoy it, and also to see Bob Dylan on an album to have such swagger, to throw that out there. To me, it was sort of emblematic of what that album is, the swagger of Bob Dylan, and somebody who also just doesn't care. In a way that is like, I'm going to put this right in your face. Again, the song, we can get into the song as well. The song in of itself, I think, is sort of articulates who Bob Dylan is career-wise. But that line in and of itself, I love dearly.
So that is from, in case we get somebody who's just wandered in to this Bob Dylan approximately podcast, that is from I Contain Multitudes, from Rough and Rowdy Ways, his last album at this point, the last album he's recorded. And I've just got a few facts. Let's see. It was released on April 17th, 2020, the height of, the COVID years. And to me, and it's the opening track as well. And to me, it does sort of set out his intentions sort of for the album.
It's
not going to be like any other Bob Dylan album.
It's the setting of the scene, isn't it? And I totally agree with what you said, Jordan. One thing I love about this entire album, and this song in particular, is it's Bob Dylan with a swagger again. It's the first time I think he's looking back on his own mythology, almost. Like you get it with False Prophet as well. There's a tongue-in-cheek, I'm last of the best, you can bury the rest kind of thing. Which is, as a fan, to see him going, oh yeah, I guess I'm a legend. It's kind of cool.
No, I think I saw that concert when he toured the Rough and Rowdy Ways tour, his first round of touring that, and he was alive. He was so excited to be playing these songs for the first times, and it felt cocky. It felt like I'd seen him a couple years earlier. It felt like he had de-aged 20 years just with the swagger and the energy. And the album is funny. Like he makes dick jokes in the album, but it does. Which, Dylan, dear Lord, he's speaking my language now. I get it; it's a Homer reference, but if you could reference genitalia, you got me, Bob. And that album, I think, like there's so many moments where he's just enjoying his own language. He's playful, but so many of these things they invite you to interpret whichever way you want. And I think this album is a really fun one to interpret as perhaps Bob Dylan's final statement, perhaps a statement of career and purpose, and so many of the songs lend to that. And he kicks it off with I Contain Multitudes, which in and of itself as a title, he's ripping off from a poet, which, boy, we know Bob Dylan, if that man steals from the best. He steals from Whitman, he never cross-checks it, never name-checks Whitman, and he jumps right in saying, you can't trust me, but that's who I am, I contain all these multitudes, which is, if you're trying to boil Bob Dylan down, which I don't suggest you do, but if you will, that's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah. There's a quote, because this song, the theme of this song is something that's come up a lot. He was saying it back in 1997. There's something during an interview when he was promoting Time Out of Mind. He says, I change during the course of a day. I wake and I'm one person, and when I go to sleep, I know for certain I'm somebody else. I don't know who I am most of the time. It doesn't even matter to me. I mean, you talk about like films like I'm Not There. It's giving different versions of Bob, and I love that. It's sort of this thing of I am just the sum parts of all I've ever experienced, and they change from minute to minute. It's a really interesting way of looking at identity, and I think I'd love to know Bob's sort of what he thinks of his identity, because he's a shapeshifter, isn't he?
Yeah, in fact, I always name check my wife, Suzanne, because yes, I am a Bob Dylan freak, and I listen to Bob Dylan all the time. And, we actually talk about Bob Dylan sometimes because there's no choice. And
oh, wow. Dear Lord. There are choices. There are other things to talk about.
There's no choice for her, I meant. But anyway, she was saying, so I was saying about we were doing I Contain Multitudes, and I was discussing the whole idea of the song. And she is, let's say, much smarter than me. And she's got a responsible job and things like that. And so she's reading a book by an eminent brain surgeon at the moment. And she works in the National Health. And she said, oh, this book that I'm reading, this brain surgeon, who's one of the top brain surgeons in the UK, has said that it's exactly the same thing. He said, it's our brains that tell us who we are. And everyone's sense of self is very fragile. And all it takes is like one little click and you are somebody else. And he's seen it happen. It's a scientific fact. It's just that most of us can't access it to do it to ourselves, which I think Bob Dylan seemingly can.
To me, what has always resonated so much with Bob Dylan, beyond the music that he creates, the lyrics that he writes, is his ability to confidently move through those people at a speed that the entertainment industry, the world around us, usually doesn't reward or doesn't want from you. I always look back to his folk period as one where, as somebody in the comedy world, everybody's working so hard to get something that works. And if you get something that works, you hold on to it for dear life. You squeeze as much as you can out of that because you cracked a nut. You figured out something that resonates with people. And you see Bob Dylan, who becomes the face of a movement and then immediately lets that go. He becomes another element of his personality. He allows himself to evolve into something quicker than our society normally recognizes. And that's sort of been his freedom throughout it. And if you are a Bob Dylan fan up until this point, what you love about him is the shapeshifting and his ability to become so many different things. And if you're disappointed in a Bob Dylan album or a concert, it's because your expectations are stuck in the past with some idea of who Bob Dylan is. And then he gives you I Contain Multitudes, which also is a very accessible song. It's the references are really on the surface there. You can you're walking across the beach and the gemstones are gleaming. They're easy to pick up. You don't have to search super hard for them all. But it really does sort of lay out, this is who I am. I am all of these bits and pieces, these bobs and trinkets, and I am all of it. And that's what you have to get if you've come here. And to be honest, if you bought Rough and Rowdy Ways, you probably get that. And so you're already along for the ride.
But I was amazed that Rough and Rowdy Ways was such a huge bestseller. I haven't checked. I don't know if it's his best-selling album of all time, but it's certainly right up there. And where did all these people come from? People must have jumped onto the bus on this. Like they must have thought, well, I've heard this Bob Dylan fellow is good. I will give. And then Rough and Rowdy Ways. It's not an easy album.
The last Dylan concert I went to see was last November, and there was a girl. She must have been 25 or something, and every time a Rough and Rowdy Ways song was there, she would be like, yeah, singing along. And then the other stuff, like, watching the river flow, she was kind of like, huh, which I thought was great. It's
a
like
new one.
Someone's like a 25-year-old woman has come to Dylan at Rough and Rowdy Ways, and those are the hits.
Well, it's wild how popular Murder Most Foul was. Which I remember when it came. I revere that song. But that's a hard song to just jam out to. But it was COVID. We're all locked away looking for some sort of connection, and then Bob Dylan drops a 15-minute song with not a lot of variation sonically. But about this time period, I think it speaks to what people needed at that moment, which was to glob onto something. It almost became a meditative process to sit down with a piece of art for that long, which was a gift in and of itself. But I can also see these younger generation, like I see myself in some ways of when I found Bob Dylan, like the idea of getting into Bob Dylan could be a monumental task for somebody who's never gotten into Bob Dylan. Where do you start? What is the invitation? And for a generation that has all music on their phone at all times in no particular order, to sort of be presented with, well, here is this person of importance who has put something out right now. Welcome yourself in. Like that to me is like, oh, this was maybe the cleanest on-ramp we've had for Bob Dylan in 15 years. I don't know if the Sinatra era was as open an on-ramp for the younger generation as something like this, but it does get me excited that there are people who still resonate with it. That being said, my Bob Dylan concert, not a ton of people under 40.
Yeah.
That's the baseline. I felt real young at the Bob Dylan concert. But there were younger generations who were connecting to it, but the older ones felt most rewarded by it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 31 and I got into Dylan when I was 17. So I'm one of the sort of younger ones. But it does. There's very few people I know of my generation who, a lot of musicians particularly respect Bob, but there's no one I know who's my age and absolutely crazy about him like I am, in a way.
Are they crazy about other things? Do they have that sort of temperament to dive into it? I think there's an element, there's a temperament to a Bob Dylan fan base beyond just like there's Bob Dylan is, I think with all great art, somebody who creates with intention and interest, and I think the intention has some opaqueness or some ability to bring your own perspective to them. Like I think part of the fun of Bob Dylan is that you get to piece through so many things, that it is rewarding to invest your time and energy in trying to make things make sense, to follow the tangents. And I recently read Ulysses, and that book in and of itself is all tangents and references, and it was so fun to get lost in that. And I found myself surrounded by a lot of other people who also loved like getting inside the mind of James Joyce as he worked through it all. And many of them were Bob Dylan fans, and I even realized some of the books were edited by professors who worked on Joyce and Bob Dylan. And I was like, yeah. Now I see this mindset. There's a mindset for this type of work that rewards people who are interested in diving in and making sense of sort of the catalog.
I mean, it's very heartening, isn't it? That they are out there. I was at the gym the other day, and I tend to swim. Well, not I tend to. I've only got Bob Dylan on my in my pool earphones. So I've got.
So you're underwater and listening to Bob Dylan.
Yes.
Wow. And this before this podcast started, you were like, I'm not totally into Bob Dylan. I am hosting a Bob Dylan podcast, and when I submerge myself underwater, I'm also listening to Rough and Rowdy Ways. But other than that, I'm just like an average Bob Dylan fan.
Ordinary Joe. But so okay, I admit it.
There we are. We finally got into a minute. We're 31 episodes in.
Your poor wife. Your poor wife.
Actually, she has bought me. Let's think that she bought me that. I've got a Rolling Thunder review poster, so she's come over to the dark side. So, she's fine. Don't feel bad for my wife. But anyway, so I was at the gym, and there's a cutoff point when I have to take off my earphones that I swim with and put on my regular earphones in order that I don't listen to the awful music in the gym. There's like a 20-second, and it's always like being smashed in the face, because you'll hear today and tomorrow and yesterday too, and then you take that off and it's sort of like dumb, it's really dumb, and then you get your Bob Dylan back on.
I've written
you have hacked it. You've figured out a way to block out the rest of culture so that you can exist within the
only
bubble.
I could.
That's all I'm trying to do, is actually block out. I've written down, I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I put in my notes, is this Bob Dylan's My Way? It feels kind of like a looking back on his life and, you know, I have no apologies to make. I go right to the edge, I go right to the end, you know, all that stuff.
I would argue this. I like that comparison. I would argue Rough and Rowdy Ways is his My Way. Sinatra put it all into one song, okay. Bob Dylan needs an album to do his My Way. Yeah. And like to me, Rough and Rowdy Ways, if I brought that, I put the vinyl out here. I was like, what I love about it, I'm like, I Contain Multitudes is sort of a statement of purpose as to sort of the perspectives of who Bob Dylan is. False Prophet to me is blues swagger, which is embedded in who Bob Dylan is. It's also him playing with the idea that he is deified from his public, and therefore has fun with it, makes fun of it, but also gets to have the swagger of somebody who is treated like a god. My Own Version of You to me is a song to his audience. And I also think it's got funny, but it's such a cocky thing to say. Sorry. My Own Version of You. Sorry, My Own Version of You to me is about his audience. The Frankenstein metaphor to me is about, you know, is about creating a persona and playing with expectations. I made up my mind to give myself to you. To me, that is the audience song, and humorous to me. Like, what a way to say that you love somebody is like, you know what? I've decided to love you. It's so.
There's a lot of that.
There's a lot of that in Bob.
You know, love sick. I'm sick of love.
We covered Need a Woman, which was very much a list of the things that he requires.
Yeah,
and there's no, you know, he's
so
non-negotiable.
He is very needy, and he's like, the power resides in me to give it to you, and I've decided to do it. I mean, that one talks so much about travel as well. To me, that's sort of a nod to all the time he spends on the road in small towns, performing to people, and that he's decided to give you this gift of love.
And Key West is about a philosopher pirate. So
which was always a part of who he is.
Yeah.
That one to me, what I love so much, like the rest of that album, Jimmy Reed to me is also like the blues swagger, which he's sort of saying goodbye to his rock personality, but having the most fun with it. I do think at Key West, I almost picked Key West for our talk today because I haven't figured it out, but I love it. And I think to me, it does what my favorite Bob Dylan songs do, which is confound me, but there's still an access point. I still feel so that the first time I felt Key West, I was like, I really like that song. I know Key West. I have images of it. Feels like a warm, beautiful, somewhat melancholic place to end up. I think of Hemingway. I think of writers. I think of cocktails. I sort of think of the end of the world. And Bob Dylan here is talking about being here. He's making McKinley references, but also like there's a tropical paradise element. It feels like purgatory or the afterlife in some sort of evocative manner. And so every time I go back to that song, it sort of places me there. And to me, again, in Bob Dylan's My Way, he's not going to wrap it up. He's going to leave you in a place of wanting and knowing just enough, and then he's going to give you a 15-minute diatribe about the death of John F. Kennedy and what the radio DJ should play.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned Key West, and something just clicked in my head because I've just finished reading that biography of Tennessee Williams. Came out about over 10 years ago by John Lahr. It's a very it's like a 1,000-page forensic Tennessee Williams life, and the reason I mention it is because he was a kind of let's face it, a kind of a genius, at least he was. He just couldn't, you know, his first few plays, changed American theater, but he couldn't really handle his genius. The reason I mention it is because he had a place in Key West, like way. He was one of the original sort of artists to go down there, and his tragedy was that he couldn't handle his genius, I think. And Bob Dylan, it's amazing that he could somehow, he maybe hasn't handled it well all the time, because how do you handle a mind like that? how do you go through life like that? And William's life ended in tragedy, as often happens. But Dylan's seems to have, it's been very up and down, but it's now mostly seemingly up,
or at least blocked away from outside perspective. He is clearly, it's hard to. I'm very curious as to what a day in the life of Bob Dylan looks like. I only have pictures and stories to hear, but that, from the age of 23, suddenly the world wanted only information from Bob Dylan. We know he escapes, he goes to Woodstock, he goes out west and lives in California. He tries to find places away from it all, but over the last few decades, he seems to have found that solace on the road, which is, as performers, is such an interesting choice. I get what is so appealing about being on the road, but Bob Dylan doesn't need the money. No. He doesn't need the hassle. And sometimes you go to his shows and you wonder how much he's getting from these shows.
Yeah.
But clearly he is getting something from these shows and communing with the audience. He's talked at least decades ago about that's where he can truly be himself, or if not himself, reveal the version of himself that he wants to be within. And so that has sort of been the answer. If the question is, where is Bob Dylan comfortable, or who is Bob Dylan, the answer probably lives on the road.
I think I've said this before, but to me, it almost seems like him being on the road so much is his way of trying to lead a normal life in some way. Now, being on the road is not a normal life. It's so the opposite of a normal life, but it's more of a normal life than being hounded on the street as a legend, which he would be if he was just, wandering around Malibu all the time, kind of thing.
Well, it's a normal life for him, isn't it? That's seems to be what he's created, maybe to live as Bob Dylan, because how do you do that? Can I go back arbitrarily to I'm just like Frank, Anne Frank, like Indiana Jones?
Please do,
because I've got so many theories about just those few lines.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing that interests me, well, we did one of our first episodes, we did High Water, and the line that we kept coming back to, or the little phrase was just throw your panties overboard, or I'm no pig without a wig was another one. And it's sort of, it's my, well, I feel that he throws things into songs that are, chugging along quite well. He just throws a little stick of dynamite into the middle of the song to blow it out of the water, and
almost that's take your attention as well. It's
don't
switch off.
Don't switch off. Yeah,
I agree. And some of these, I think you could also feel you turn on a Bob Dylan album that you just got right now, and you think this one is written for eternity, or there's something. He's a historical character, and suddenly within a minute and a half, he's talking about Walt Whitman and speaking towards the gods, and then to throw a pop culture reference in there does sort of pull you into the now, and that I think is a very focused choice.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, Anne Frank, Indiana Jones, and those British bad boys, the Rolling Stones. Just the phrase, those British bad boys, the Rolling Stones. Now, I remember when I sort of grew up, and Dylan and the Stones and the Beatles were all coming out, and people would say, and those British bad boys, the Rolling Stones. That's, I think it's like some AM DJ. Mm-hmm. It's not Bob. Yeah.
I like that. There's another, if you throw on your Bob Dylan glasses and try to comb through it, and I look at that line, I'm like, all right, well, what does he mean by this? I can make an argument that just like Anne Frank, he's nodding to being Jewish. Just like Indiana Jones, he's nodding to being a performer, a creation of a fictional creation. I could also argue he's nodding to being a fictional archaeologist who combs through things of the past to make new once again. And then the British bad boys, the Rolling Stones, he's also an amalgamation of what rock and roll is at its infancy. And so in that line, his Jewishness, his fictional creation, his ability to search through the treasures of mankind and find some use in them, and his desire to rock is who Bob Dylan is. I could also simultaneously make the argument that that's a dumb, bad line. He's referencing Indiana Jones, probably the Crystal Skull Indiana Jones too, like the worst Indiana Jones, and Frank, because he walked by something and was like, "Oh, Anne Frank, that's something I can make work in a line." So that's what I love about Bob Dylan is you can choose the first method, and you can also hear the second method, and I don't fully know which one he was thinking as he did it, but he works with such intention. Both are compelling.
Yeah, I think he said, well, he was asked about that line in particular in whatever the one interview he gave for Rough and Rowdy Ways was. And he said something like, it was a meditative thing. He said, not that he was meditating, but that may even be the wrong word, but it was like, it just came into my head, like Anne Frank, Indiana Jones, and those British bad boys, the Rolling Stones, which is bullshit, because it didn't. Because you realize, we go through any Dylan song, really at any time, but certainly on this album, it's multi-layered. You can go start again and again and again and think, well, it works on this level, it works on this level, and it also works on this level. Mm-hmm. So
his work, his process is constant. It's still a job. He's not a genius where it just comes in from the gods and he writes it down. Going to Tulsa, I think Nish talked about it on an earlier podcast, but what I was most taken by at the Dylan archives are all of his notes and the little marginalia he has on the sides of the songs that he's written in the notebooks that he kept on him. I was taken back behind the vaults to look at old pieces of paper and notebooks he had from hotels in Germany on a stay over and the little things he's writing. And what you're seeing is a mind that's always at work, who's always doodling ideas and working through them. But there's all these little moments too where he's putting down words that rhyme with other words on the sides of his notes. Because he's constantly crafting this. It's not just that these are the perfect couplets that articulates what it all. He's also like, well, what rhymes with murder? Girder, turder, what is, and because that's the work of it. And it's too easy to see Bob Dylan as a genius who it all came to him and not just a craftsman who's constantly working at something, putting down the little things that may or may not rhyme, what may or may not scan, what is interesting to him. And I think that's what is most impressive about him. It's the work that he puts into all of this.
Yeah, he's not just, and I think, but he used to, well, no, even back in the days when when he said it came easier to him, those 65, 66 albums. I'm sure you saw I've seen photos of the lyrics, stuck inside of Mobile with a Memphis Blues, or with a hen? No, again, or whatever.
Yeah, with a hen.
That was the original.
Very different song.
Well, that's it's youth and drugs. They really help ideas come out quickly. So I think, and that's you see that too. It's like, oh, and the scene. I would argue one thing that maybe doesn't get talked enough about is I do think inspiration strikes and people go through fallow periods. There are also, spaces and times where drugs can open those things up and you are more free with the things that you say. Also, that early period, he's more connected to the world. He's running into people on the streets. He's bumping into people in Greenwich Village. He's mad at people on 4th Street and writing about it. He's pulling the world in. And like we talked about a year or so later, the world suddenly becomes almost unattainable to him. He is a totally different person outside of it. And so some of that freedom, I think, comes from all of these things, including being in a scene where ideas are banding about, new people are walking in and out, and you can be so creatively open that things just flow.
Well, it's that old sort of saying, isn't it, that the fame and the fortune and the mythic status in Dylan's thing takes you further or can take you further away from what the creative energy that got you there. But you see Dylan as a shapeshifter, changing constantly as he goes along, finding new ways of writing. As he said in the Ed Bradley interview on 60 Minutes, he was like, I can't write songs like that anymore. I can do other things. And it's like, he was kind of, although he was, what rhymes with blue for Tangled Up in Blue, there's something about, I don't know, just communing with something, it seems, in the 60s and the 70s. And it probably is harder nowadays, but it's, in some ways, it's richer for that. The fact that he's having to really go, what am I going to put together? What am I going to put together? And he's living a sort of more consistent life in a weird way because he's on tour all the time, but it's the same thing every day. He's probably sitting in a bus scribbling stuff down.
And he's still allowing himself to go right to, like, there's this line, I go right to the edge. I go right to the end. I go right where all things lost are made good again, is another way he rolls. And I think he's talking about Newport, he's talking about the motorcycle crash, he's talking about the Woodstock years, and every single phase that he goes right to the end. I wonder if, well, I think in the 80s, he stopped going right to the end. We covered Empire Burlesque on our last episode. And, I think maybe he was just like pulling in, taking a pit stop, just sort of like, or maybe he got lost. I think he did get lost.
I think he stopped being sure of himself for the first time in his career. It was kind of like such a massive shift in music and culture and fashion in the 80s that I think he kind of, it was the first time Bob has ever gone, well, how do I fit in? He never did that. He never did that in the 60s, when the Rolling Stones were changing for Her Satanic Majesty's requests and all that, when psychedelia was coming in, everyone kind of changed. Oh, we don't want to be left behind. Bob goes the opposite way and goes, right, I'm going to strip it back and do John Wesley Harding with, a bassist, an acoustic guitar and a drummer. And it's, brave. And that's why I love Bob, because he's fucking fearless. But the 80s, for me, were the first time he just goes, I don't know what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing here.
Well, he's been so spot on with taste for so much of his career, and part of that is his superpower early on. He understands what good taste is. He understands to borrow from what he got through. He understands what's happening in the rock scene. He understands what's happening in the civil rights movement. He understands how to combine all of these things in ways that can move towards something that is innovative or reflective of what is happening. And to be that spot on for multiple generations, like, you don't see a lot of people in their 60s having great taste, even if they nailed it in their 30s. From a fashion standpoint, it's hard to be batting 1,000 with something like that. So I get where that comes from. Also, there's an element of luck in so much of his early stuff. Like, you listen to some of those early recordings in the 60s. He surrounded himself with interesting, good people. He had great taste, but as we know, he wasn't pouring over the production of all of these songs. He got a vibe, he got a feel, he got good people in a space, and he knew what he liked and what he didn't like, and he was able to say yes to the sound and the vibe, that thin, wild Mercury sound, and say, yes, that's it, let's move on to something else. And then when people wanted him to play it 6 months later, he'd forgotten it. He had been looking for something else. So I think there's always a churn with Bob Dylan as to what his taste is, what he likes, how he hears a song. And for so long, he surrounded himself by other tastemakers, people who were along for the ride, who were really good at what they did, who would get into the studio, and Bob Dylan would sort of create something in that space and say, yes, that's what I see right here and right now. And it was so spot on for so long. You see some of these fallow periods and what happens in the 80s. And I think part of that is just the creative process. He's not pouring over the sound of these songs. Some more than others, but more often than not, it's the experience in that space, in that room with those people and what they bring to that. And it's not always there. It's not always the thing of the moment. It's not always the thing that he hears in his head or the thing that should be in that space, in that room. But he's always still churning through that, which is what's compelling to me.
Yeah, I was listening while I was swimming the other day. I was listening to what popped up I think it was sitting on a barbed wire fence, and I think it was an early take of it. It was certainly, if the song is wrong, Mike Bloomfield was definitely playing the guitar, and it's the version where he changes the lyrics and he says something like, "My girl is great. She makes me." She makes me sweat or something, but she's not as good as this guitar player that I've got here right now. I mean, he makes it rhyme, but that's what he's saying. And then he just goes, "Wah!" and everybody in this, you can just feel the rock and roll. He so loves the rock and roll. He so loves Mike Bloomfield's solo that he lets him take a solo. He doesn't let a lot of guitarists take a solo, and I felt the joy of just the pure joy of Dylan being in a rock band that he put together, which he wanted to do since he was more or less a kid. And I just thought we sometimes forget, that the joy of just doing that. It's fabulous.
Being in a room with your buds, being creative and open is the manna of artistic creativity. It is so playful. It's so fun, especially as you get more isolated from society and the world. That is where the joy and the inspiration comes from. I had a spiritual moment a few months back where my wife and my child were gone, and I had a night to myself, which with a little kid, and I don't get that very often. I was like, I have the whole night. What am I going to do? And I had just gotten, I got the Basement Tapes. I was like, you know what? I like the Basement Tapes, but I've told myself it's never fully clicked for me. I just need to give it some time. And I was like, now is the time. Let's dive into the Basement Tapes. And I literally, perhaps it's sad. I'm choosing to paint this picture as inspiring. But I opened a bottle of champagne. I was like, I had a bottle of champagne that had been in my fridge for years, always waiting for the day. I'm like, fuck it, today is the day. I'm opening champagne. I'm sitting in front of my record player for 2 hours alone, and I'm listening to the Basement Tapes. I've told myself this is all I need. I just need to sit down and think about it. Like, we'll do it. Tonight is the night.
Not like winning an Emmy or something. It's no waiting for the Jordan waits for the Basement Tapes. I'm going to listen to that one day. That's when I open this.
This is what it is. So I drunkenly listened to the whole Basement Tapes. I give myself over to it. And what was so moving to me, it was specifically, why am I forgetting? It was used in I'm Still Here. Going to Acapulco.
Yeah.
Going to Acapulco moved me so much because I think suddenly, call it the champagne, call it being away from my family, but I was there in that basement. And what I heard was a guy with no expectation that this would go out to the greater public. You know, I guess some of the stories are more so maybe they're writing this and they're doing these demos so that they can sell some of the lyrics and the songwriting, but that this is not being made for larger consumption. So what it is it's Bob Dylan and his buddies in a basement. And they're just sharing what they love, which is music. And going to Acapulco is so vulnerable. To think that you are a 26-year-old person who has this song, there's this vulnerable, sad, melancholic wail, and that you're just with 5 of your pals in a basement and like, hey, can I just sort of bare my heart to you guys in this basement? And it's not a performance for 10 million other people to see how vulnerable it is. It is me existing in a basement with my pals being vulnerable. Can I share that with you? And that to me is so moving, to be so open and wanting to share with just your pals something vulnerable. That is magic. That's what makes that thing pop, whether you recognize it or not. That's what's going on in that room. And there's elements of that vulnerability that happens in studios throughout the catalog of Bob Dylan that really holds it together. This person is having fun or wants to share it with the people that the live performance he's having in that space.
No, exactly. I was listening to the Basement Tapes at some point in the last couple of months, and I had exactly the same sort of experience as far as his vulnerability. I think it was, is it called Sign of the Cross? That it's on that, you know, the new, the latest incarnation.
Yeah.
And even just singing that, and it's way before his, you know, official conversion, but the vulnerability of singing, yeah, it's full of these vulnerable moments that are offset by these moments of hilarious, you know, just joy and ridiculousness, and slap that drummer with a fish.
A $1 million bash always makes me laugh as well. My favourite line in Dylan's voice at that time, "I took my potatoes down to be mashed," is one of my favourites.
But it does make you want to sort of be there, and it's beautiful, isn't it? It gets more and more beautiful.
Oh,
I hope you were able to explain that to your wife when she said, "Where's the champagne?"
Fucking champagne.
yeah. Why is there vomit in the kitchen? Honey, I was communing with music history. Well, you need to clean up the vomit in the kitchen.
Can I ask you, what age were you, and what was the first thing that drew you to Bob Dylan, Jordan?
Bob Dylan was always I always sort of knew of Bob Dylan. Like "Blowing in the Wind" just became like a canonical song culturally. So I knew that these were these important songs that were there. But I really chose to dive into Bob Dylan in my early 20s when I was a hip hop guy in high school and college, was aware of Bob Dylan, but not that interested. I loved Eminem, and I knew that Bob Dylan liked Eminem, said that he was like his favorite lyricist at one point. And so there was a connection there. I was like, this Bob Dylan guy seems pretty cool. He likes Marshall Mathers. There's something to this. But my connection to Dylan and the ways I get deeper into it is glomming on to somebody else's passion for Bob Dylan. And I was in the improv scene in Chicago bunch of comedy folks with good taste, interesting taste in music, and a pal of mine loved Bob Dylan. And I was like, I need to know more about Bob Dylan. How do I get into him? Where do I start? And he said, Desire. Start with Desire. His articulation of it was Bob Dylan's voice matched with that violin are sort of in harmony with each other. It was his favorite album. So I started with Desire. And I loved it. I wasn't all in, but I loved the vibe, the feel. Hurricane had the politics, which was interesting to me. One More Cup of Coffee. I enjoyed just sort of the ethereal nature of it all. I was also a White Stripes fan at the time, and they covered it. So there's sort of some kismet that was going on. And I got a little bit deeper into it. That jumped me into like Highway 61 to get the rock Bob Dylan. And then I will say, like, Scorsese's doc, the first one, helped open up what the folk scene was to me. As much as I enjoyed Bob Dylan and understood it, I don't think I fully understood what the folk scene, that folk was punk rock in its own way in the 50s. And that Scorsese doc laid it out, seeing Odetta, seeing some of the performers that I had heard before but never really watched perform, and suddenly seeing what was alt about it. And not just old fogey. I could go back to Freewheeling and some of these early things and see it almost as alt music as opposed to classical music. And that started to fill out my Bob Dylan obsession. And then I got deep into the the 60s run, and then just getting larger and larger. Also, I'm the narrative of Bob Dylan became so evocative as a person in the arts. I've always found it as a comedian and as an improviser, I always get more out of looking and learning about people in other arts as opposed to the ones than comedians. I love hearing about musicians and writers and poets and the paths that they take. And as a kid who is from Michigan and moved to New York, hearing about a kid who's from Minnesota who moves to New York and finds his own way and then finds a new way and then creates a new way, that narrative has always been so compelling to me and thoughtful to me and sticky to somebody who's always trying to figure out what the next step is. And Bob Dylan always seems 7 steps ahead. So that sort of threw me into this Bob Dylan space. And then you just keep opening up doors. I'm still, every year or two, I'll find a new album that I haven't given time. I'll pop open that champagne, sit in front of the record player and dive in and get a whole nother side to this guy.
Let's hope it's not Knocked Out Loaded, because that will be a sad drunk evening.
Yeah, my wife walks back in on me listening to Knocked Out Loaded, just passed out of the floor. She's like, "This is it."
This is
Really? Time out of mine, I'll give it to him. But for God's sakes, this man has no class anymore.
But at one point we've got to revisit Knocked Out, or just visit Knocked Out Loaded.
Yeah, we will.
I think I've heard it. I've heard all the songs on it. I some of them twice. I mean, there are some, actually no, a few of them more. There's a few good songs on there, but I always feel with Dylan that there probably is something there. You just have to scrape off all the shit, you know.
That's what great art is to me. Is once you have faith in the artist and you believe that they are making art with intention, then there's something to be gleaned. Then it's on the listener and the receiver to find something, to get something out of that. I was introduced to self-portrait on a road trip with a pal of mine, and I fell in love with self-portrait like 10 years ago because again, somebody else's passion. He's like, "Oh, I love this Bob Dylan album." I was like, I don't know a ton about self-portrait. I don't think people like self-portrait. And then I was like, "Oh, I love it." And then I'm creating a narrative of self-portrait. It's raw in a way that I'm like, "Oh, he calls it self-portrait. This must be a reflective album that's about who he is." He actually painted a version of himself on the cover. And now there's these weird kind of corny covers that are done sort of ramshackle. Well, he must be commenting on who he is as somebody who is a product of these older songs and these standards. And then there's songs that are melodic and almost meditative on that to me feel like he's communing with something. Like I brought a lot to self-portrait and got so much out of that. And that's why even his minor albums, his strange albums, and Empire Burlesque, if you come to it with faith in the artist, which very few artists have that kind of faith, and who continue to make things that are outside what you know them for. I love the Rolling Stones, but those albums are they're very similar. And so I'm not constantly surprised. I'm still talking about Bob Dylan 20 plus years after getting introduced to Bob Dylan, because those doors are different and strange. And as you become older as an artist and a human, you realize you have parts of you that are your Empire Burlesque. You have parts of you that are curious in faith in Christianity. You have parts of you that are nihilistic or saccharine. You have parts of you that wants to listen to a Frank Sinatra album. And Bob Dylan, one of the few artists who was bold enough to explore those parts, those multitudes. And if you are a fan who has given him, credit for doing that and understand his intention, it's a cornucopia to explore.
And even I feel this way, like Knocked Out Loaded is often used as the possibly the worst Dylan album. It's still got Brownsville Girl on it, which is a genius song that no one but Bob Dylan could write. And I've said this about Empire Burlesque as well. No, it's not the greatest album. The production's not great. But if that was a up-and-coming musician's debut album, it would be considered sort of a great debut album. It's not a bad album. I always feel, and maybe this is just me as a wounded Bob Dylan fan sometimes, but I feel like Bob is held to higher standards than almost anyone, and always has been, because he's not just a singer, he's the voice of a generation. He's not just this, he's the guy who tore down Newport, all that stuff. And when you actually look at it, it's like, well, for a mere mortal, these are still good albums. Do you know what I mean?
And also, he keeps changing as we've, you mentioned the Stones, and he mentions the Stones, the British bad boys. And the thing is, they just become more the Stones. And I mean, I've been suckered into buying most of their albums, including like the last. I didn't finally buy the very last one that came out, Hackney Diamonds. But I listened to it on Evil Spotify, so that's kind of the same thing. But and I remember when I was listening to the first track, I thought, yeah, well, let's rock, yeah. and the second one was, oh yeah, and then there was a little ballad or something, and I was like, yeah, the Stones, yeah. And then in my mind, I was not doing that on the street, but in my mind,
you're drowned. You're underwater.
You're like, oh, God. Exactly. No, I don't listen to the Stones when
just
I'm
Dylan underwater. There we are. That's the rule.
But after about 4 or 5 tracks, like I never got to the end of the album because they were just so the Stones. There were no surprises at all. It's none.
Similarly,
whereas with Bob, it's just like one surprise after another.
I love AC/DC, but like every album's kind of, by the end of 12 songs, you know what's coming. And the Stones, as great as they are, and the fact they're still playing live is amazing, they are kind of a heritage live act now. Bob is the opposite of a heritage act. I mean, a lot of people probably go to see him to go, oh, we just want to see this legend Bob, and then they have no idea what they're about to see. And it's
is he not going to get up?
Does he
behind the piano?
Why is he wearing a rain jacket and turned around the entire time?
Why is there a potted plant in front of his face?
Somebody cut.
So many places.
That I mean, what you're speaking to with the Stones, and no disrespect to it all, but all of the bands, everybody's trying to figure out how to exist, how to become artists for 40 years, 50 years. I think it's such a compelling story and question. As artists who are aging, that is a question we're all asking ourselves. Is like, how do you become an artist into your second, third, fourth, fifth decade of creation? And so many people reach back towards that one thing that worked, that nostalgia hit, that dopamine hit. But nostalgia in and of itself, to me, is a melancholic emotion. And when I do listen to artists who are just reclaiming that thing that was interesting 25 years ago, I get that little dopamine rush of like, oh, this is registering with something that I once liked so much, but it's felt then with something deeper, which is that you are missing something. Time has passed. Nostalgia is this sad emotion. And then I go to a Bob Dylan concert, and yes, so many people are frustrated by what he does, but the buy-in to Bob Dylan is that he is always changing. And to see an 83-year-old person who you trust, who acts with intention, to see what they are interested in right here and now, to me, is always always an exciting choice. And that's why the Sinatra era, when I saw him as dressed up like a Spanish bandolero doing Sinatra songs, and I remember standing, a bunch of people are like, what the fuck is this show? And I'm like, you know what? This is a Bob Dylan show. This is what this guy wants to do right now. And you want it to be 1965. It will never be 1965. And if he pretends that it's 1965 and tries to perform just like 1965, the uncanny valley between it being 2025 and 1965 will make you so sad in your soul that you missed it. And guess what? You missed it. But what you have is this person right here, right now, making the choices that excite him right here, right now. And that is always so fascinating. It doesn't always work, but that's the whole thing. It might not always work. It probably won't. Art is a fragile, scary thing that we're always throwing spaghetti at the wall, and seeing that process of it all should be what is compelling to you. It should be a Jackson Pollock painting. It should be the process. That's why you're here and not at home listening to an album.
Yeah, you've got to risk failure, and then Dylan risks failure time and time again. Whereas the Rolling Stones, I don't mean to bash them, but I mean they're not risking anything anymore, and that's what
they're having
sad,
fun, which is fine. They're having fun, and I'm sure it's a great night.
They are. Like I've been reading this book by David Remnick. I don't know if you've read it. The editor of the New Yorker. His collected interviews with older artists. It's called "Holding the Note." And in fact, last night I read the Keith Richards chapter, and it was about 10 or 12 years old. This interview, and it was quite clear that. Well, in the book, it was a puff piece in a way, not a puff piece, but it was basically after he'd written his memoir, or he talked to somebody who wrote his memoir, and I don't know if you've read it, but I had to put it down after about 3/4 of the way through, because it was quite clear he was really hard on Mick Jagger, and he used to be his kind of bestie, and about halfway through it was just sort of like. He was, but he isn't anymore. And their relationship is just a business relationship. And I found that sad. And when you see them, and when you saw the release of the Hackney Diamonds thing, and they were all like, yeah, we're all great mates, mate. Yeah, yes, we're all cool with you. And you thought, yeah, they get into their separate limos, and it's all bullshit. And that made me sad.
Yeah,
but it doesn't seem to make other people sad. So
yeah, there's no more live experiment that is the Rolling Stones. There's just a performance of the albums that you like, which I would go see, and that would be fun to commune with that. But what is still alive there on stage? And to be fair, I've seen the Dylan shows where they're struggling to find something that's alive, or it feels like Dylan isn't as compelled to give the audience something else. Although the last one I went to was at the Beacon Theater, Rough and Rowdy Ways tour, a year ago, I think, maybe 2 years ago. And the energy was great. We had decent seats, not great seats. So Dylan is sort of this shadow-like figure up front. And he runs into, I was watching the set list for months beforehand. It was pretty static at that point. He goes into his last song, and I'm like, you know what? I think this is his last song. I was with my buddy, my Dylan friend, as we all bring our Dylan friends to these shows, who get it. You're like, you get it, we got this. I brought my Dylan friend, Justin, and it's like, let's rush up to the front of the stage. They're not gonna kick us out until after the song, and this is the last song. So we get up out of our seats and we go rush up to again. It's an older crowd, so rushing up, it's easy. If you ever want to get in the way,
roll if anything.
Rough and Rowdy Ways tour, you can edge your way to the front. You can make it happen. Insider tip: easy to nudge and get around.
No mosh pits at the Rough and Rowdy Ways tour. Yeah.
We sneak up pretty darn close, and we see Bob, and he's smiling. The one thing I couldn't tell from the distance is he's having a fucking blast, at least from my understanding of it all. And that was so rewarding to see. Like, oh, he likes this. Thank God. There's times where I wonder, times where I'm questioning. The Rough and Rowdy album is one that seems to reinvigorate some of these live performances. But I'm watching him in front of these people, and all of these shadows, and the bad placement. And yet there he is, and I see that smirk. And you're like, oh, he's there. He's there.
It's so interesting. I've been listening. I listen to the live stuff all the time. I'm currently listening to stuff from 2000, which was amazing for the live stuff because he had the best band he ever had, basically. But it's so funny. There were these run of shows that were just kick ass, like the best I've ever heard. And the next show that I listened to, it was like Bob realized that it was going too well. So in 3 songs in a row, he just starts singing the lyrics about 2 bars late. And you can tell what he's doing is just testing the musicians. And thankfully, they're shit hot musicians, because if it was me, I'd be like, fuck, how do we get back on track? But he's just like, okay, let's keep you on your toes. We're not going to go too well for too long, you know?
Yeah, do you know, do you know the comedian Stuart Lee, British comedian Stuart Lee?
Yeah.
So he's a big Dylan fan. He likes free jazz. I think that's his.
He's a big jazzer, yeah.
But you know, and that's way out there. But so I had him on the previous podcast that we did, and one of the things that struck me was what he says that he does, which is speaking to what you just said, is that he'll be in the middle of a routine and he'll literally say to himself, "This is going way too well. I've got to fuck this up," and he does. And I've seen him live. We've seen him live, but I've seen him more times than I can remember. And there's always a number of moments. Like if he gets through that, he might fuck himself up a second time, and he puts the audience kind of through the ringer because they don't know if it stops being funny. Like he stops it being funny.
He loves things going wrong, and I think Bob loves that too in a way.
I mean, one of my other musical obsessions is the White Stripes and Jack White, and big Bob Dylan fan. But something that he talks a lot about, and you see in a Jack White performance, is leaving space for improvisation and things that are broken. And it's based very much in the blues. You know, the blues as a folk tradition are constantly repurposing lyrics and stanzas, chord changes. They're all borrowing from one another, and it's loose, and in many ways it feels like it's often made up on the spot. And the White Stripes would oftentimes borrow bits and bobs from blues songs and then create difficulties in their sets to provide spontaneity. Jack White famously used to say, like, "Oh, if I know I need to set the mic here within 3 steps so that I make it in time from the piano to the microphone, I put it 5 steps away." So the audience feels that there's a rush and there's a necessity to it. And that's what was always what I love about watching Jack White, or what I loved about watching the White Stripes, is their ability to do that. And that, to me, you know, the White Stripes is a more extreme version of it in some senses, but I see that high wire act. I see Dylan playing around with that, and that is what is always that to me is it's always so fun to play with. And I'm an improviser sort of by trade, and that is always what's always fun. It's like, how is this show going to go different than what you'd expect? How is this show going to go off the rails? Where is he going to find something and give you something new? I remember the one that I saw at the Beacon. He was having such a good time. You know, he obviously rarely talks at these, but he was a little bit verbose. It was like, I'd never heard him talk. And he stopped the show, and he stopped the show. God, what was the movie? I think it was Creed. He stopped the show to say the equivalent. I'm going to misphrase it, but it was like, have you guys seen Creed 3? Sylvester Stallone, man. He deserves the Oscar. He deserves the Oscar. Yeah. And then launched it. I was like, oh my God. This is the first I've heard Bob Dylan speak. And it was to make a case for Sylvester Stallone winning the Oscar.
It is just like being a Bob Dylan fan is sort of, I feel like he's constantly fucking with us deliberately, and I kind of love it. Like,
well, he doesn't want any of this, which is what is great, right? He's like, oh, you're gonna pour over it. You know, you know, I think I was watching that Scorsese one that Joan Baez makes some comment about, and I take this with a grain of salt. I don't exactly believe it, but she makes a comment about like her and Dylan and him writing up late one night and being like, "Can you believe it, man? Someday people are going to pour over these lyrics. I don't even know what they mean, man. They'll figure it out." I think there's, whether or not that actually happened, I think there is truth in that. And there has to be. In all great art, you can't get stuck down in thinking what all of these things mean. You create something with intention and then let everybody else figured that out. But the fun of being a Bob Dylan fan is that you will get Sylvester Stallone references and you can choose to love them. And if you do, life is joyous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a mystery in a way. It's a bit like, well, it is a bit like a religion because it's you have to have faith and it is kind of mysterious. You know, I sometimes stop myself
and you'll never get answers.
And you'll never, well, yes, exactly, exactly. That's what faith is, right? There are no answers. I was thinking, like, why? What is it about Bob Dylan that? Why am I devoting a huge chunk of my life to? To poring over the things that I know he would, laugh at and he wouldn't, as you say, he wouldn't listen to a Bob Dylan podcast, and he wouldn't read a book about Bob Dylan. So what is it that it's almost a compulsion, really? I guess maybe when you believe in something, certain people anyway, they just follow where it goes in a religious way, really.
Yeah. I think these are this fandom is an act of love. It's an act of it's attention. To give undue attention or intense attention towards one thing, the creation of one thing is a beautiful, joyous thing. It also connects people. I think that is part of it as well. We talk about when I mentioned reading Ulysses. It sort of clicked a few things about my Dylan obsession in what I love about art in general. Is I love the creation of art. I love people who have wonderful minds, but who it is work to create something that has puzzles and has questions and not a bunch of answers, but is made with such intention that you want to know more. And then I love the actual act of being a fan of trying to make sense of something that we know there isn't sense to be made. There's not a final answer, but when you get tired of pop culture and things just saying, this is good or bad, feel happy or sad, like as I age into these things, I want more nuance in the art that I have and the ability to show love towards a piece of work made with intention that then draws you closer to other people who see the world that way. And that is what is so fun about doing podcasts. That's what's so fun, to take your Dylan fan to a Dylan show, because we all feel so crazy and lonely in this world that, like, sometimes you listen to a Bob Dylan song, you're like, does anybody else hear it this way? Does anybody else see that one beautiful crystallized idea that I think is being spoken right to me? And then you find that one pal who's like, I was on that same message board. I do see it. I see it in that same way. And you exhale because you're not so alone in this world. And Bob would like roll his eyes. It's like, you fuckers, you think that's what I meant? It's like, it doesn't matter anymore. It's made with such care and intent that it's a gift to other people to find each other because of it.
That was Bob Dylan Approximately with Carrie Shale
and Daniel Crespin. Produced by Robin Guise.
And recorded at Cathouse Studios, Islington, London.
If you have a Bobsessive friend, please spread the word.
It ain't quite the end.
We'll just bid farewell till we meet again.